The high limestone cliffs of the Tuwaiq escarpment cut diagonally across the land of Arabia, running for nearly 1,000 miles from Riyadh in the center of the kingdom towards the south of the peninsula. Beyond their southern slope lies the great sandy desert of Arub al-Khali, or Empty Quarter. At a point where the sands spill through a broad gap in the escarpment was once a rich and prosperous city, now in ruins, known simply as Qaryat al-Faw, or the City of the Gap. Who lived here? What sustained them in this arid and barren place, 100 miles from the nearest modern settlement? The area is completely abandoned now, the silence broken only by the occasional camel herd which stops for water at the one well at Al-Faw. Is this perhaps a clue? The great trade routes which grew up all over Arabia are the key to understanding the history and settlement of the Arabian Peninsula. They linked the ancient and wealthy kingdoms of southwest Arabia to the lands which bordered the Mediterranean and the Arabian Gulf. Trading towns along these routes provided stopping places for the richly laden caravans. Al-Faw was one of these towns. Following the line of the route which passed through Al-Faw is a modern road. It provides an easier access for the successors to those ancient caravan trains. Once every year, the desert around Al-Faw is filled by those professional nomads of the 20th century, the archaeologists. Since 1972, a team from King Saud University, Riyadh, has carried out a systematic excavation of the site. Their leader is Professor Abdul Rahman Al-Ansari. Was Qaryat al-Faw a city of power, pomp and ceremony, or merely a simple resting place for travelers? The answers could be provided only by excavation and detailed scientific investigation. Although the work is far from completed, the results obtained so far have presented an intriguing picture of life during pre-Islamic times in this remote place. The first job of every season was to clear away the wind-blown sand, which each year threatened to undo the work of the archaeologists. If left undisturbed, it could rebury the city in a few decades. In the early years, excavations had centered on the largest mound on the site. At first, it could have been a palace or a fort. As it was uncovered, it became clear that it concealed something very different, the souk, or marketplace of the city. It had massive outer walls, nearly 6 meters thick, built of stone and sun-baked mud brick. Inside this were found the remains of many rooms and buildings, apparently constructed later, as they are not keyed in to the main wall. These rooms contained cavities or store cupboards, hollowed out of the walls and lined with gypsum plaster. Overlooking a central square is the facade of a more substantial building. Perhaps it was a wealthy merchant's house or customs office. The center of the souk is dominated by the large well. It is now dry, and excavation has revealed a 7-meter depth of stone lining, and also large stones which had been pushed into it at some time in the past. Outside the walled area of the souk were less substantial market stalls, perhaps for poorer traders and their customers. We can imagine that merchants, townsmen and travellers once thronged these narrow streets. The scene would have resembled those souks which still survive today in some areas of Arabia. These occupants of ancient Al-Fao discarded or lost the objects of everyday life, which, rediscovered by the archaeologists, have enabled them to put a date and a living image to the empty rooms and corridors. Over the last 10 years, these items have been recorded, studied, restored, and then put on display in the museum at the College of Arts building in King Saud University. Pottery of many shapes and sizes. Some is glazed and decorated with wreaths. Custom seals from other cities on the trade routes. Roman or Nabatean pots were found. One jar contained a quantity of date stones. Other vessels are carved from alabaster or from steatite. Incense burners were carved with decorations still seen in the region's architecture. Fine glass, simple jewelry. Many fine pieces of bronze were in the souk, made by the lost wax process, possibly at Al-Fao. Coins from many parts of the ancient world. This one carries the monogram of Kachel, the god whose name recurs at Al-Fao and appears to have been synonymous with wisdom, mercy and generosity. Several religious or ritual objects were identified, small clay figures covered with inscriptions. Little that is precious was discovered during the early years of the excavation. One piece of silver only, delicately engraved with an inscription. There are many other inscriptions on display in the museum. Most of these are in the Sabaean or South Arabian script, suggesting strong links between Al-Fao and the spice kingdoms of the southwest. These wooden combs were preserved in the dry sand. The wooden base of a small set of weighing scales. Carbon-14 analysis of organic remains like these has enabled the main occupation of the city to be dated between the 4th century BC and the 5th century AE. That means that pieces of cloth, some still showing the original patterns or design, either woven, printed or embroidered, have lain in the sand for up to 2,000 years. A few of these resemble clothing shown in classical frescoes. Others appear more like those found in modern Southwest Arabian designs, again suggesting a South Arabian connection. So the early work at Al-Fao Souk established a date, and also the major influences on the civilization that once flourished there. But what of the other areas of the substantial town? Where did the people live and work? For it was apparent that the souk was separated from the town. The archaeologists accordingly turned their attention to a large mound 500 meters from the souk. The first task was to set out the grid pattern for this new excavation. While the preparation for this investigation proceeded, a group of staff and students climbed the escarpment above Alfao in search of prehistoric remains. They soon found themselves engrossed in what is as yet a totally mysterious phenomenon. The whole escarpment top is covered with curiously proportioned man-made structures. They may be very ancient, or date from the Neolithic period, which ended about 4,000 years ago, or they may be as recent as the city of Alfao itself. As there is no topsoil, and therefore no layer deposits for dating, nor any other remains associated with them, they must remain, for now, a mystery. For the archaeology students of King Saud University, Alfao provides a training workshop on a grand scale. Practical work like this reinforces the knowledge that attention to detail and extreme accuracy are the only ways to achieve anything worthwhile. But they had not left the lecture theatre behind. The grid system provides an accurate way of recording finds. The walls, or balks, temporarily left in place, retain a record of the strata already dug through and can also be used as a wheelbarrow route without damaging the excavation.
يوسف ايش رايك الطبقة اللي داخل في هذه؟
لا في فصل من هنا جاي. في داخل الطبقة بالنسبة لي.
Each new layer was recorded and marked as it was discovered.
جاي كذا شوفها من هنا.
The position of every find had to be plotted before it was moved, and the information recorded. At every stage, the work was photographed. Gradually, the shapes of the buildings emerged, but their uses were not at first obvious. One area, for example, revealed a maze of walls. The walls were plastered with gypsum and were in very good condition. Inscriptions on some led the archaeologists to wonder whether these rooms were used for religious purposes. The chambers opened onto a courtyard in which was found the remains of organic waste and animal droppings. As the work on this section progressed, a cesspit was identified, with provision for cleaning out the waste for use on the nearby fields. Another site in the residential area, in a prime position nearest to the souk, was identified as the house of a wealthy merchant family. The house had its own water storage tank. A majlis, or council room, was revealed. Stone blocks